Good evening, and thank you for joining us at Shackleton for the 5th live event of Antarctica Now. I'm Patrick Tillard, your host for today and Shackleton's content manager. We've covered a huge amount of ground in the last few days, from polar photography to glaciology to geopolitics. And for those of you who've missed any of the live talks up till now, we've got all of them on the website with an array of content that is focused around the content of continent of Antarctica. To come this week, we still have exploration, architecture, and today's topic, wildlife. Now, I'm going to start with a slight confession, which is that I personally haven't been to Antarctica, which means that I further my understanding of the continent through books, documentaries, and vicariously living through the adventures, stories, and work of others who have been there. Today's guest is one of these very people. We're delighted to be joined by biologist, wildlife presenter, and conservation filmmaker, Lizzie Daly, who first appeared in front of the camera some 3 years ago and now works with the likes of National Geographic and the BBC. She's worked far and wide in Alaska, Finland, Romania, Scotland, Kenya, Iceland, and Norway, to name a few, documenting birds, mammals, and fish of all shapes, sizes, and rarity. She's captured a large and loyal following along the way, envying, admiring, and learning as she shares her intimate encounters with wildlife species. In 2009, her work led her to the frozen continent of Antarctica. Today, she'll be sharing her experiences of her time there, the excitement of being in such close proximity with whales, penguins, albatross, and leopard seals, as well as looking at some of the issues facing these species as climate change has more and more bearing on their ecosystem. For everyone listening, first of all, thanks for joining us. And there's a panel at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A option there. So as we go along, if there's anything you want to ask Lizzie, please feel free to kind of comment as we go, and then we'll get to some of them at the end. But for now, Lizzie, welcome to Antarctica Now. Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you as one of our speakers this week.
Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction. And hello, everyone watching. It's lovely to be here. A little bit of a tough run up, Patrick, I've got to say, with a list of incredible people you've had already in this Antarctica Now festival. So thank you for having me on. And as Patrick's saying, yes, I am a little bit, let me share my screen with you. I'm a little bit obsessed with all things wildlife. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background. And today is really all about exploring the awe and beauty of Antarctica's wildlife. My background, as Patrick was saying, is I have been a wildlife presenter or broadcaster for a number of years now, about 3 years. So I feel very it's a great opportunity to be able to go all over to various places to be able to document these stories and share stories about the natural world, which is ultimately what I love to do. But primarily I am a scientist. So my background is as a wildlife biologist and not on anything polar or Antarctica. So just so you know, going into this is going in with my curious naturalist mind, because my expertise is primarily on African elephants and wildlife behaviours and movement, fine-scale movement behaviour to tell us more about animal state, which actually in some of the species I met during Antarctica, the visit to Antarctica last February, so 2020, just before everything got a little bit strange and different. That was my last kind of journey to see wildlife and document wildlife. So yeah, it was an incredible experience, and I'm going to kind of navigate you through. I'd like to bring you with me on that journey, and both in kind of my scientist mind and also to tell you about what I documented and what I saw, because as well as being kind of brought there on assignment with the company who asked me to go there and write articles and learn about sustainable traveling to some of these regions, I was also there to film 3 online films, like behind the scenes films for BBC Earth. So within that, we're looking at changing southern oceans and interesting behaviours within penguins and whales and leopard seals, etc. So that's still in the edit, and that's coming up in the next few months. But it really was a trip which for me, you know, you could take so many things from it, not just the actual place, going to that place itself, but actually trying to get under the skin of the incredible wildlife that you get in these regions as well. So yes, let's go into it. I don't even know where to start. There's so much to cover, to be honest, Patrick.
I'll give you a little help then, shall I?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so a bit about your background. And so you started your trip in South Georgia, right? Which is home to some of the largest penguin and seal colonies on Earth. Why was this an important part of your journey, and what kind of struck you most from that island before you'd even, you know, got down to Antarctica?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to include South Georgia in this. Why wouldn't it let me here we go. South Georgia, particularly in this because the journey went from Ushuaia, Falklands, South Georgia, and down to Antarctica, which is quite a common journey for a lot of people visiting these regions. But I've got it. Falklands is brilliant, but South Georgia is all encompassing. It attacks all of your senses. And this was the first stop. This is what welcomed me to what it's like to be in the sub-Antarctic regions. This is a snapshot of Salisbury Plain. And, you know, South Georgia is just a chaotic, the best kind of chaos, but a chaotic environment where there's just, you know, shores of Antarctic fur seals and just thousands and thousands of king penguins lining the beaches. And I wanted to include South Georgia because it is such a fantastic wildlife conservation story in so many different aspects. You know, there's a history of sealing, of course, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well, as whaling, which was prolific then into the 20th century up until about 1960. And of course, there's the issue with rats on the island, which can be hugely detrimental for a lot of seabirds, a lot of ground nesting birds. So the South Georgia that you're looking at today, you land, it's like this, you turn up on this kind of dark, dramatic beach with dramatic landscapes, and you just feel like you've entered a completely different world for all the right reasons. So I had the real pleasure of being able to head out a little bit earlier than anyone else who would actually land on South Georgia. So myself, now friend and National Geographic photographer Simon Pearce, he was also on assignment. So we went out with the crew every time we got to a new place, and it kind of added to an element of excitement because you really were going into something I've never seen before, never experienced before. The sounds, the sights, the smells of this scene that you're seeing is really hard to describe, but as I mentioned, an attack on the senses. And with king penguins, they're quite dynamic, you know, it's constant moving colony. The Salisbury Plain colony here has about 60,000 breeding pairs, and you've got a number of other breeding pairs around the island as well. So the biggest is in St Andrews Bay, where there's 150,000 breeding pairs. 150,000 breeding pairs is absolutely mind-blowing. And being in this environment is really, really humbling and really kind of puts you in your place. In 2011, there was a rat eradication project that took place on South Georgia, and really it's like one of the most successful island conservation projects out there. So wherever you're watching in the world, if you visited an island with seabirds or ground nesting birds, I'm hoping you have, then you will know how important it is to keep these islands rat free, because they really can decimate these populations. There's an island near me in Wales called Skoma Island, where there's lots of fantastic manx shearwaters and exciting ground nesting birds like puffins there. So again, very strict biosecurity and very strict rules in terms of rats and cross contamination as well of pollen from various places, etc. But for rats and seabirds, it's their biggest risk, if you like. So a massive operation in 2011, where over 21 days helicopters flew around South Georgia, essentially dropping out of these helicopters toxic bait. Now you may be thinking, what is the impact of dropping that on such a large scale over these large regions? And actually the risk of spreading out this bait was actually probably the lowest in terms of this method that they could possibly do, because a lot of these seabirds that you see here, they actually head out and have a marine diet. They don't necessarily feed on land. The rats that would ingest this toxic bait they don't really like the light, so they'd go into their burrows, tend under in their burrows, so away from scavengers like our petrels that we'll be talking about today. And generally it led to a complete eradication of these rats. And what is interesting, actually, they had about a 6-month window to do this. You can imagine the size of the operation to do this. And they successfully did it in a short amount of time, and they were up against the clock because, as we all know, changing landscapes, glaciers were retreating at an alarming rate, and what was sectioning off areas in South Georgia, and they were releasing this toxic bait and successfully removing rats from one area. But as they were doing that, you know, glaciers were retreating in another area which was separated by this glacier, and if they weren't quick enough, essentially rats from that section would move over, and they could kind of be undoing all their work. So a fascinating conservation project, I'm sure you'll all agree, and one that's led to scenes like this one and a number of species just absolutely flourishing across the island. I should say as well that the waters around South Georgia are incredibly rich. So in the Scotia Sea, the positioning is really, really important. And we're going to talk about Antarctic krill a little later. But in the later stages of the life cycle of Antarctic krill, they kind of get bigger. And as they move from the Antarctic Peninsula, where there's a lot of Antarctic krill, they kind of move northeastward, which kind of drifts towards South Georgia area. So actually South Georgia, despite it being a sub-Antarctic island in the middle of nowhere, is in the prime position to have a lot of this upwelling, if you like, of krill, which goes on to create scenes like this one. This is a picture I took at, where was it, St. Andrews Bay, that massive colony I was talking about. And yeah, I mean, I wish I could take you there now to hear the sounds of that and to smell the guano of these birds. It's really, really powerful. And while I was a penguin scientist who was carrying a drone base of king penguins, and you just learn some fascinating things about them. So how they, they're constantly vocalizing and in large numbers. And we all know that king penguin chicks, they recognize the call of their parents. But how do they do this when you're faced with a wall of other king penguins and other king penguin calls this big? Really fascinating bit of research which found that actually there's the deepest frequency of that call, that king penguin. They come out at sea, they can feed, a number of kilometers out to sea, and while these chicks are young, they're heading out back and forth and taking it in turns to rear their chick, their single chick, which there are a few fluffy ones in there. Good luck finding them. There is a select few because we're kind of later on in the season for chicks, but there are a few in there, and they recognize this deep frequency of their parents' call. They found that the first quarter of a second of that call is enough for a parent and a chick or chick to recognize their parent, and they repeat this call every few seconds. I thought it's absolutely brilliant. Can you imagine, recognizing? Well, I'm sure if you're in a room of loud people, you can instantly recognize the voice of your loved one or your partner or friend or whatever it is. So it's a similar concept, but it's just amazing when you see this scene that is going on, and they're so kind of well adapted to be able to the bounce back of South Georgia. So of course, whaling ended in the 1960s. Pushed the Antarctic fur seal almost to extinction, just a few hundred left. And of course, the rat eradication project was a success. So really seen a bounce back on many different layers of South Georgia. I wanted to include the South Georgian pintail duck here, you can see, because it's absolutely fabulous. Again, we've seen more of these pintail ducks on South Georgia, and they're actually a carnivorous duck. So they have actually been documented or spotted sticking their heads in seal carcasses, which I just love, because you look at this duck, firstly you think, what is a duck like this doing at that kind of latitude? Absolutely awesome, well adapted little bird, absolutely brilliant. But actually they are carnivorous as well, which is also a brilliant bit of ecology there. And one of my favorites, so the giant petrels, they're so charismatic when you're walking around South Georgia. If you get to see a petrel walking on land, you start to see that prehistoric dinosaur aspect of their movements and their feeding as they scavenge off. They may steal chicks. We saw a few petrels trying to steal some king penguin chicks, scavenging on dead seals or dead penguins that may not have made it. Absolutely brilliant birds. There's two petrels that you really want to be looking out for. So the one captured here is a northern giant petrel, and you also have the southern giant petrel as well. So the telling the difference is quite tricky, but the best way is to look at that tip of that bill. So you can see they're in the petrel family. They're a tube-nosed bird. They have this fantastic number of layers of plates, which are all to do with kind of excreting that excess salinity, as spending so much time as a seabird, a pelagic seabird. But they have that kind of red tip on their bill, whereas a southern giant petrel has like a greeny tip on their bill. And this one, you can see lots of water. It was kind of washing the blood away from its feathers. Is just brilliant birds to see in action, and to kind of see the interactions with all the other wildlife is, yeah, absolutely one of my favorite things. The seabirds is a big kind of pull for me. go into these regions to try and understand more about the wildlife there. So it's really all about the seabirds for me. Of course, the albatross, again, a pelagic seabird, an impressive. I'm sure you've all heard the incredible facts and statistics about the wingspan. You know, they're 11-foot wingspan, the largest seabird on the planet. And when you actually see them, they are truly, truly remarkable and unmistakable. And I think for me, it was kind of a bit of a humbling moment, because you really get a sense of the size of these birds, absolutely enormous birds, and seeing them on the wing as well is just incredibly impressive. This behavior that you're seeing, I'm sure you've heard of it before, it's called dynamic soaring. It's traveling over huge distances with very, very little effort. And you know, when you're having a sea day or you're out at sea and you see this, it is just, you could just watch it for hours, using the air, the uplift of air above the ocean, and making the most of that incredible updraft. Absolutely fabulous bird, and lucky that we got to see them both on the wing and actually on the nest as well. So I kind of just want to give you an idea of what it's like leading up to this image here. So it's a place called Pryon Island on South Georgia, and there was a boardwalk that's been built by a local naturalist and a friend of the company who I was with. He built this boardwalk which kind of leads up through this, what you're seeing, this tussocky grass. And we landed on this pebbly beach. There's Antarctic fur seals everywhere, and you kind of make your way up this boardwalk. And it was so windy on this day, like high winds, kind of pull up your hood, walking up this boardwalk. And now and again, out this tussock grass, you'd see Antarctic fur seals kind of popping out, both pups and mums, using kind of this tussock grass to sit their pups on for a while. High winds, there was a huge rainbow that came out. It was seriously like David Attenborough documentary style. I was just absolutely loving it. So myself and Simon headed up to the top, and we had the joy of seeing this. This is the wandering albatross calling, throwing back its head, as well as a number of wandering albatross also just kind of making its way or flying around actually the island where we were. And yeah, I mean, in terms of memories of South Georgia and moments in South Georgia, this was really one of those special moments. And albatross generally on the whole trip, and I'll show you a little clip later on, but they were a real highlight for me. We saw grey-headed albatross. You may have heard of the light-mantled sooty albatross as well, lovely kind of grey plumage and really lovely, lovely dancing behaviour as well. And the black-browed albatross as well. So this is a black-browed albatross chick, just sat on these kind of distinctive mud piles that the albatross build. And I'll never forget actually the moment that we were walking down to the colony to go and see these black-browed albatross chicks, and they kind of just sit there. They sit there for about 280 days actually until they're ready to fledge. Then they'll head out to sea for about 5 years before returning back to find a mate and start that breeding cycle. And I was walking kind of down through this tusky grass. We were on the other side of the island, and it was quite still on this day. And as we were walking down, you know, now and again out of these channels, there's fine muddy channels through these tussock grass, and you could kind of now and again just see a glimpse of a rock hopper running past, or kind of popping out of nowhere out of this tussock grass. And had it happen a few times where there's a rock hopper here, rock hopper there. And if I'm there trying to film, you know, you're trying to blend in with your environment, definitely not get in the way, but absolutely make sure that you're kind of blending in, and that the wildlife is not necessarily reacting with you and more naturally. But as I turned around, there was like this odd feeling that someone was watching me, and right behind me was a giant, full adult black-browed albatross, you know, still an enormous wingspan, and it was using the channel like right behind me through the tussock grass. So I pretty much just escorted a black-browed albatross all the way to its chick, about 5 minutes. It was the most bizarre thing. I had nowhere else to go other than forward, so just had to keep walking. So I just basically, yeah, walked the black-browed albatross back to its chick, which was a humbling experience and very odd to watch, I'm sure. Yeah, so this is an image of a number of albatross chicks just kind of sat on their muddy stool, if you like. And yeah, they kind of were very comfortable standing, stretching and sitting back down, while you can see from the sea there, it's like really high winds, very, very kind of, yeah, big seas and wild conditions, definitely. what else? So another highlight for me was the elephant seals. The elephant seals are big characters. We weren't there, so I went in February and March. There wasn't really that classic view of, the males with the harems fighting off other males, but there were young ones practicing, and they're just brilliant, brilliant to see. And so my research, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm looking at fine scale movement behavior. And so a large part of that is tagging animals. And there was a really, really cool bit of research that came out quite a while ago now, using satellite tags, learning about the ecology of elephant seals when they go out at sea. Because we know so much about how they breed and their behavior on land, but what happens when they head out to sea? They found that the females and the males go to different different feeding grounds outside of the breeding season, which is fascinating. And also the elephant seals are some of the most deep diving marine mammals. So males can dive down to about 1,500 meters and can dive for about 2 hours. They're incredibly effective divers, incredibly effective. And yeah, well, with these tags from my lab in Swansea University, we're learning all about their different diving behaviors and the depth they dive, as well as a number of other studies that found some fascinating things about elephant seals. Here's a little clip of 2 young ones practicing, and you can see even in their practicing, there's still lots of action. There's a little bit of blood, there's lots of kind of territory. This is a really important process for these elephant seals, that as they kind of get bigger and bigger, trying to establish what it is to be a big male and a big dominant successful male over that harem of females, which will happen eventually. So really exciting sights. One of my kind of final highlights of South Georgia, there are so many, but has to be these guys. This is a sleeping Antarctic fur seal pup, which were kind of all along the coast there and just taking over South Georgia. They're part of the eared seal group. So you can see in this picture here of this very unimpressed Antarctic fur seal, very unimpressed. These fur seals were kind of lining the beaches, incredible animals. And of course, the bounce back of just a few hundred from that kind of early 19th century late 19th century to early 20th century to now, where there's millions of these fur seals lining the beaches, just absolutely brilliant. Very big characters, lots to see in terms of their behavior and interactions. And when you arrive, you constantly have to be aware of what the seal pups are doing, because they're very, very curious. So those are just some of the reasons I love South Georgia, Patrick. I think probably I could go on.
Okay, well, we've only got you for one evening, so we'll sadly move away from South Georgia then. And so, yeah, I think we move on to Antarctica, looking at like the roster of places you've been to, which is obviously hugely varied, hot, cold, basically all around the world. Can you give us an idea of what you kind of know what you're going into when you go to Antarctica, right? You've read about it, you've seen some documentaries. When you actually arrive there after maybe years of thinking that you're going to turn up here, what's that like? What is Antarctica like compared to the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there is no place like Antarctica. And like you said, you do read about it and you become so enthused about what it may be like to journey into this other world. And I wanted to share this picture specifically because this is really the scene that I arrived to. This was my first moment. I took this picture literally moments after I arrived on Antarctica, and it was completely different to South Georgia, but still as epic and still as kind of all sensory, just an all-round experience, because the silence is something that jumps out at you. Silence, the colors, the vibrance, the busyness, but the quiet of it. There's something really dramatic about once we left the expedition ship, we were out on the Zodiac. It was completely still day, and you're peering through crystal clear water at these bright blue icebergs, and the snow is so vibrant and so white, and there's just all these fantastic gentoo penguins, which are completely different to your king penguins, but still very, very numerous. And they just completely grab your attention. But there is an element of just awe and inspiration when you arrive here. And as I said, it's completely different to South Georgia. So yeah, arriving here, seeing this is absolutely incredible. And actually just behind some of the icebergs here, you're looking at a load of gentoo penguins. There's an Adelie penguin just at the front here, kind of out of focus. You can see because it doesn't have that orange bill. It's nice kind of eye ring and black bill. But just off of the coast here, there's lots of chicks among here, and those that have already molted were starting to head into the water. And this is where I saw my first glimpse of leopard seal, which ultimately was like my absolute go-to. So yes, I mean, the Gentoo penguins had these incredible hairstyles and strange appearances as they were starting to get rid of their molt, and they were really curious. Again, like the king penguins, there was an element of curiosity that I think was quite different. And obviously you never approach wildlife ever, and it was strange to see so many of these curious chicks actually, and having a bit of an investigate, trying to get in bags, and just generally looking a little bit curious, which normally, you know, if they do it, it's something you just have to kind of let them do. But it was so fascinating because there's so many naive chicks that were starting to kind of enter the water and start their lives with Gentoo penguins. Gentoo penguins actually have 2 chicks, so with the aim to kind of increase chances of survival of these chicks. And so there was lots, there's like a full beach, and as they start to enter the water, they're completely oblivious to the risk that is just waiting behind that iceberg. So it's a changing environment, which goes from, like, you know, really getting an idea of what it's like, the ecology of these penguins, to actually turning into a really dramatic scene where you've got predators and prey meeting from the get-go. Literally, my first landing, I had seen snow petrels, which are a tiny white petrel, which is an absolute must for me. If there's any birders watching, they'll know how beautiful snow petrels are. Beautiful, white, neat kind of bird. Saw them straight away. Had Gentoo penguins and molting Adelie penguins as well, which was brilliant to see. And then leopard seals starting to hunt and hold out on icebergs. So yeah, it's an out of this world place, definitely.
I mean, it obviously leads us pretty neatly into, I guess we've seen documentaries of Attenborough-esque levels about the wildlife there, which obviously always make it seem pretty epic. But again, just, I mean, what's it like to actually be there, you know, within touching distance of so many incredible species?
Yeah, yeah, that's the best way to describe it, to be honest, because and kind of why I want to bring you on this journey, because it is hard to describe, and it is hard to kind of capture. You know, things happen so dramatically and so quickly, and there was a number of, I guess, wildlife encounters or sequences that, remember, I was trying to pick up stories, and I went out with an idea of what to film and how to put these stories together, but all these different narratives started to present themselves, and it's that kind of place. It really is. This is one of them. So what you're looking at is actually one of the last days when we went to Antarctica. We were kind of moving out of the region towards the Drake Passage very slowly, with the hope of seeing orca, because they've been thought to be in this region. So this is of a type A orca, and you can see there's a massive chunk missing from its dorsal fin. I didn't know why its chunk was missing. It could be a boat propeller, it could be potentially a fight with another orca, it could be a number of things. But, you know, to think that orca is just adapted and is still out hunting with that half a dorsal fin, essentially, it's just amazing. But the reason this was a particular highlight was because really we saw an exciting behavior. And let me just kind of give you a bit of background. Orcas are split up. If you know a little bit about orcas, there's a lot of different ecotypes and different feeding habits. So you have transient orcas like this type A, and they typically travel offshore and go and eat marine mammals. And then you have resident orca, which are kind of coastal orca. The type Cs that you find in Antarctica are resident orca. They primarily feed on fish. So that's how you kind of split them up. But then within that, just to make things more complicated, there's lots of different ecotypes, and that's primarily based on distinguishable features, right? So the best thing, I could go on at length about the type Ds and type Bs, but these are type As, and they are pretty exciting. Seeing these was pretty brilliant. So we were heading out towards the Drake Passage, and as you can see, it was like an evening, it was like evening light, and out of nowhere, I was up on deck, and we all spotted, a big group of us spotted 5 type A orcas traveling, and they were traveling at speed. So these ecotypes of orca can travel at about 40 kilometers an hour. It's extremely quick, and it was kind of the behavior that you see, not just traveling to go from A to B, but actually on the hunt. And in front of us, we saw two tall blows with kind of that poofy top, kind of the blow shape that you can ID to be two humpback whales. And it became very quickly clear that these orca were hunting these two humpback whales, which is just, it was happening there, and it was in wild seas, and it was just absolutely brilliant. So we started to, for about 20 minutes, we were watching these orca hunt down these humpback whales and moving at such a speed. And the exciting thing about type A's is they have some of the most dramatic feeding strategies out of all the orca. In fact, probably out of all animals on the planet. You know, these are the orca that you see flinging seals, sea lions straight up into the air, 80 foot into the air, the closest seals to the moon. These are the ones that are launching them. These are the orca that are feeding on dolphins as well, have, I guess, the hardest wild to hunt, and they do so efficiently. So they even hunt whales, and that's something that there was a clip that I saw of these orca type A's actually hunting a blue whale and doing so successfully. And you might think, the size of a whale, how on earth are orca going to do that? But a large part of it is actually down to the fact that they are so elite in their speed and persistence, and they'll essentially chase down their prey until whales, like humpback whales and blue whales, are suffer from heat exhaustion and they physically can't move. They just, like us, they're mammals, so they're breathing animals traveling as fast as they can, and eventually they just get too tired. So that's when orca kind of go in and successfully hunt. On this day, the humpback whales they were hunting, two adults. So it actually ended up in the humpback whale in the distance. It kind of traveled really fast, way faster than us. And we saw this massive kind of fluke swipe through the water. I'm not sure if it made contact with the orca or was just a big deterrent, but it essentially was the kind of breaking point of that chase. Again, adult humpback whales, a lot harder than if it was a mother and a calf, but still amazing to see. And these orca are just so fantastic. So if you get a chance after this, or want to know more about the orca of Antarctica, there are 4 ecotypes there, all have brilliant stories and are kind of prolific hunters and feeders. So definitely check them out. Another highlight, I love for albatross, love for the petrels, and this was actually earlier in the journey, but I thought I'd share a clip of this because it really goes to show how brilliant these birds are on the wing. So this was a scene that even the naturalists on the boat were kind of confused, like they'd never seen this scene before, and it was hundreds of albatross and petrels just traveling on the open ocean and following us for hours. They were with us for about 4 hours until it was, we couldn't see anymore, it was dark, and they just followed the boat for hours and hours and hours. And you can see here the varying species, the incredible wingspans, and how they just are all dancing in the wind, making the most of these wing patterns. So there is a little sequence being made about kind of the behaviors of these amazing seabirds on the wing out to sea. And this for me was an absolute golden moment. It's such a rare opportunity to see kind of this level, this number of albatross and petrels together. It was absolutely brilliant. How are we doing on time? Okay. The Gentoo penguins, I've kind of mentioned that the Gentoos have 2 chicks. So your king penguins, they don't have 2 chicks, they'll have 1, but your crested penguins, so your rock hoppers, or your brush tails, they're also called, so your Adelie penguins or your Gentoo penguins have 2 chicks. And there was a number of really great behaviors to see, one of which was actually this chasing behavior in these Gentoos. So it was kind of, you spend time, you set up there with your camera, and you kind of watch what happens in these kind of big landscapes, which are dotted with all these Gentoos, huge colonies. And these young ones are still covered in a kind of an uncomfortable molt stage. They're still covered in loads of dense fur still. And what you start to see is these chicks are constantly begging for food as they're trying to grow and trying to get bigger in size. And as they do, they start to chase the parents around. So one of the sequences that is just the most dramatic sequence seeing in Antarctica, these huge kind of walls, if you like, slopes of rock. And as these penguins are coming down, running, the parents are running, these chicks are running after them. And it's kind of twofold why they do this. These chicks are chasing that parent for food, but actually it's also a way of the parents checking the fitness of the young, if you like. So the faster they run, the quicker they get to that parent for food, the healthier they're going to be, the more likely they're going to survive. So they start to chase them down, even with downy feathers at this stage, start to chase them down at high speeds, tumbling over rocks. It is a really dramatic scene, and they're the fastest penguin on the planet, but they're also, so they actually swim about 22 miles an hour, which is brilliant for chasers with leopard seals, but actually they are pretty fast on land as well. So something incredible to watch on land amongst these colonies. And of course, the leopard seals, which are some of my favorite. I'm all about championing the leopard seal. And I would say they are very formidable and they are fantastic pinnipeds and brilliant seals to watch and watch in the water. But they're also curious and intelligent. And there's a lot we don't actually know about leopard seals. So I'll share with you a clip in a short while. I just want to make sure that I can share all these with you because I know we're pressing on for question time. I haven't talked about the whales too much other than the orca, but we saw lots of encounters with whales, humpback whales. We even saw an Antarctic blue whale. So that was pretty exciting because while we were there was a big article that went out talking about a big record of Antarctic blue whales being spotted in a survey. Over about 3 weeks, they spotted 55 Antarctic blue whales off of the waters of South Georgia, which is unprecedented, especially since the whaling ended just a mere 40, 50, 60 years ago. So blue whales have the lifespan of about 80, 90 years. So it may be a while till we start to really see consistent bounce back in these numbers, but nevertheless, a really exciting sight. And that wasn't a blue whale, it was a humpback whale. And I've seen humpback whales across the planet, but my encounter with this curious young humpback whale was probably one of the best. This was like behind the scenes footage of this curious humpback whale that was rolling around and coming close to the boat and playing with kelp with his pectoral fin. Just absolutely a fantastic place for a large number of humpback whales that come here to feed on the krill. So yeah. A very close encounter with the leopard seals while we were out on the rib, and it was one of my favorite, to be honest, favorite moments actually, spending time with leopard seals. Not this clip per se. This is a leopard seal that decided to take a little interest in our boat. They're very, very curious. You can see that kind of large jaw, that large reptilian head, and just a little bite meant that we slowly sank all the way back to the expedition ship, which was great, absolutely brilliant. I didn't mind at all, but again, like, these are curious animals, charismatic animals, and they were kind of weaving back and forth around the zodiac, taking a closer look, and it was just, yeah, to see them kind of that close and to see how formidable, how large they are was a real experience. I wonder the conservation issues. One of my favorite things was actually seeing the leopard seals hunting. So we saw lots of hunting activity between the gentoos and the leopard seals. These gentoo penguins are so majestic in the water. So they porpoise in groups through the water back to land, and you'd see them porpoising completely just oblivious to the fact that there's a leopard seal sitting on the other side of an iceberg. And you'd see them porpoising this way, and then you'd see that leopard seal's head, that kind of long reptilian head, just sink. And then all of a sudden there'd be a bit of quiet, and next thing you know, there's gentoo penguins porpoising the other direction at a much quicker pace. And we saw this over and over again, and we actually saw on one day 2 or 3 leopard seals actively hunting these gentoo penguins, which for some of the guests, I'm not sure they entirely enjoyed seeing the blood and all the rest of it that comes with it, but I absolutely loved it. It was fantastic, and again, an important part of the ecology and life of these regions. So yeah, some of the highlights from Antarctica, to say the least.
That's quite a long. It's quite a long reel. I like the idea of a soft attack by leopard seal as being a great encounter. But I think, yeah, moving in then to the kind of the conservation aspects. People often say that kind of one of the most striking parts of being in Antarctica is that you can kind of actually sense and witness that climate change happening around you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that something you experienced, and how is the kind of the climate change affecting the wildlife that you encountered down there?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard even putting this talk together, because it's really important to have the balance between the reality of where we are at the moment, our planet, our environment, the climate crisis, and we talk about climate change, but it's a climate crisis. But then also to like still inspire people and show people that there is beauty in nature in this. And this is why I think so many people are in awe of the region. But putting together this talk, I really wanted to share that. Because also I think over time you may see less and less people visiting these regions as people start to take responsibility for I guess traveling just for traveling, if that makes sense. Having that incentive potentially not to travel across the world just for a holiday to these regions. But I think that'll come with time and that'll change. I think for me actually being there, I talk about the incredible article of Antarctic blue whales. But actually, while I was there, that article about the highest ever recorded temperature in the Antarctic went out as well. We talk about, adventures into the southern regions, the stories of Shackleton, but actually the Antarctica I saw is not what Shackleton saw. It is simple. Like this was a trip where you get to see the rugged coastlines and the incredible wildlife in the wild areas, but you do that without even a jacket on a lot of the time, and it's really paradoxical in that sense, because there's constant warming temperatures, of course, that increase decade on decade by about half a degree, so that we're talking really rapid increase in temperatures in places like the Antarctic Peninsula, and this is having a number of knock-on effects. Antarctic krill, of course, I've talked about it before, but it's the foundation of all of the life. Humpback whales, the baleen whales, the penguins, pretty much all of life in the southern regions. And this loss of sea ice, which is so important for the Antarctic krill, because they actually feed on phytoplankton and the algae that sits on the underside of sea ice. So we're seeing a lot of sea ice melt. So therefore, if we don't have the number of Antarctic krill in our waters, which we are seeing, by the way, slowly decline and has been declining since the 1970s, well, then you're going to affect everything in that food chain and in that food web. So, even just a simple thing, you think, gosh, how is warming directly impacting a whale? Well, that warming is resulting in less phytoplankton, less algae, less Antarctic krill, less food in these regions. And there is no kind of plan B for that. Once the Antarctic krill is gone, it is gone. So there was a record high temperatures, as well as ongoing issues with warming in general and ocean acidification. I mean, there's just so many issues, but I think for me, the one that stood out was generally warming. These massive global questions about where our planet and in places like Antarctica, where it's accelerated, where that was going and what the predictions are of that moving forward. It's really hard, actually. And one of the things I wanted to share this picture because, being there was, as I said, paradoxical, but there were some really great initiatives. This is a citizen science project that was taking place to collect phytoplankton samples. And we really need to see a push for people on the ground, which there is absolutely, scientists going out to better understand these issues. So these water samples would be full of phytoplankton, and they'd kind of go back and be measured to understand what the changes are in terms of phytoplankton density. And along the way, we did loads of citizen science. There was cloud observations with NASA. We did marine mammal surveys, of whales and sightings and things. So yeah, big conservation problems, but I think the incentive and the understanding that we need to kind of act now is there.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lizzie. I think I'm right in saying that's the end of your presentation, right?
Yeah, it is. No, absolutely.
Great.
I think just I tell you what, let's go to questions because I've spoken enough already.
Well, it's okay. It's a shame. We could probably run over into 2 hours, but we'll we'll move to questions because we've got quite a few coming in.
Okay. How do I see those questions?
I will ask them to you, if that's okay.
Perfect. Okay.
I'll pick the good ones, don't worry.
Okay. They're all good.
We can start with Aaron in Glasgow has asked, as a filmmaker and presenter, do you ever struggle with that line between documenting an event and actually then really being part of it and kind of remembering it yourself?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. And thanks for that question. Really good one. And it's, in a place like this, you have to take the moments to enjoy your environment. More often than not, you go out with a storyboard and a story, and you need to be able to communicate that effectively if it's going to have any impact. So you need all the shots, you need to put together the storyline. And if it doesn't go to plan, which often it doesn't in nature, you have to think outside the box. So you're just inside this kind of work mode. But yeah, I mean, in Antarctica, like, I'm not sure I'd ever get to go to those regions again, or potentially may not travel there again for the reasons that we've talked about already. But yes, absolutely, this is a place where I had moments, selfish moments, where I kind of just looked up and absorbed my surroundings. But it is a constant battle. Yeah.
Okay, next from Emma, who has asked, we often watch documentaries and see or hear the difficulties that camera teams or presenters have with watching struggling or vulnerable wildlife. Is it something you've encountered, and how tough is it to kind of fight that urge to intervene?
Yeah, is it something that I've encountered? Gosh, yes. I mean, I do a lot with seabirds, as you can probably tell, and you're constantly seeing, especially off the coast of Wales. I'm very passionate about kind of local wildlife, celebrating that. But you see kind of entanglements and things, which, yeah, you absolutely, with the right licenses and the right people, in the case of an entanglement, of course, you kind of get involved, or at least kind of help that seabird. And a lot of the colonies, they're bringing back, for example, gannets, they bring back lots of material in their nests and they get caught up in that. So as it's kind of a human-made impact, that has to be kind of intervened with. However, if it's a natural behavior, oh gosh, it's hard, isn't it? Because it may be climate change related. The best thing, to be honest, is not to intervene unless it is, directly impacted by or made by humans. Nevertheless, it doesn't change how hard it is to be in that situation. I guess for me, I haven't seen too much of it yet, but you do put these stories together to often look at the plight of a species or an environment. And in those times where you're surrounded by, sea ice melting, you go to a place and you think, oh, I'm going to go film this glacier, and half of it's missing. Then it's kind of a stark reminder of where we are. But it's important. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I think we can combine a couple of questions here, one from Acacia and one from Sari. How do you compare the characters of Gentoos, Adelies and Chintraps, and which is your favorite penguin?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So the Chinstraps were interesting, and I had kind of this, not much time with Chinstraps, to be honest, but there was a whole group of Chinstraps just kind of sat on the edge of this rocky outcrop, if you like, and there was waves crashing, and they were all kind of just jostling around, and it's like almost like, you go, no, you go, no, you go. And so all of them being kind of brush tails, they're all quite charismatic. But I think that the Adelies, from what I didn't see again too many Adelies, but the ones I did would just kind of be a bit more elusive or a bit more timid, and now and again would kind of just come up to you, squawk, and then off they go again. So just because, for me, I've got my kind of scientist head on, I like to kind of get into the behavior and everything of that animal, and the Gentoo penguins did it for me. There was lots of slipping down ice channels, and there was rolling around in guano, and just the most charismatic chicks running around with their parents. So I think it's the Gentoos. Yeah.
Okay. Got one from Beatrice, who is a 7-year-old in London, who is currently having dinner with her family while watching this. And she wants to know, when we're allowed to travel again, where do you want to go next?
Good question. Well, I think I'm currently waiting to deploy some tags in Kenya and Tanzania on some African elephants. So that's where I'll go next. And the plan is to spend some time in the field with the elephants, to observe them and understand their behavior and document them along the way. So yes, when it's safe to do so, that's where I'll be next, hopefully.
Okay, and then we'll hop on to our final question. Sorry for everyone who haven't got to. There's a lot, but I think from another Lizzie, actually, when you go to somewhere like Antarctica, do you leave these places with a feeling of hope or more of a concern for the future?
Yeah, again, a good question. And I'd say both, a bit of a cop-out answer, but it is both. I mean, ultimately to fuel change and to ultimately try and change people's minds, you need to go into an environment, find the stories that are powerful and are going to inspire people and give people something to take away and give them that hope. But then you also need to be realistic. And that's why we're seeing more in documentaries now, documentation of the realities, because it is a reality and we all need to wake up to it. We all need to start changing our minds, thinking that we're not responsible and it's not down to us to make the daily changes that we can as part of this big problem. So both. I mean, Antarctica in particular was a very tough one, if you like, because it was real highs and then real lows and really mixed feelings actually being there. So I mean, if you're going to approach any conservation project moving forward, tackle it with both, because that's probably what's going to make the most change and change the most minds.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lizzie. That is sadly all we've got time for. It's been really amazing to have you as part of the festival. So
yeah, thank you.
Great. And thanks to everyone else who's tuned in tonight. Please join us again tomorrow if you're around at 6 p.m. when we'll be talking to a leading polar architect, Hugh Broughton, who will be explaining the challenges of designing for the world's most extreme environment. So we'll hopefully see you then.